week's video article comes from the November 1983 issue of Flex magazine, and it is about Lee Haney's first pro victory, which was the 1983 Night of the Champions. And this is an article written by John Balik, who would go on to own Ironman magazine, of course. And it says 1 point win gives Haney first pro victory. In emerging triumphant at the sixth Night of the Champions, Lee Haney is beginning to fulfill the promise he showed by winning both the 1982 NPC National Championships and the IFBB Heavyweight World Amateur title. Haney has served notice by his performance that he is a force in pro bodybuilding, though he did so while exhibiting some rough edges in his presentation. I felt the judging was reasonable with a 1 point final difference between Haney and Greg Defaro, but it could have gone either way. The details of the competitive confrontation between Haney and Defaro point out many of the tough judging decisions that must be made at this level of competition. Haney is tall, heavily muscled, with excellent overall proportion. He is not nearly as lean or cut and separated as Defaro. The upper bodies are comparably cut, but Defaro's legs are far superior in the definition department. Haney's structure is more pleasing, more classical. On the other hand, Defaro has developed a strong stage persona, and his free posing brought the standing room only crowd to a crescendo of exciting frenzy that no other competitor achieved. He has not always been such a strong performer, but he has the intelligence to have analyzed his physique and its presentation and taken the steps necessary to make progress. Defaro told me that Samir Bannout, who is known as a very accomplished poser, helped him smooth out his routine and work out the details of his hand-arm positions and transitions. Haney is another story entirely. His music doesn't have anything to do with the rhythm and content of his posing. It is background and not the integrated whole that it must be to make the presentation truly effective. I don't want to be too hard on Lee because he really is a novice in the pro ranks. However, in watching his routine of partially executed poses, a great deal of detail is missing. The mind tends to fill in the blanks, but the film doesn't, and that tells the story. Lee has the physique potential to be a Mr. Olympia. Time will tell if he has the will to transform his lethargic stage performance into one worthy of his great physical stature. Defaro has taken what was once just a collection of a few good body parts and some only so-so, and through persistence has emerged as a complete pro with an emotion-laden routine that gets the job done. Overall, Defaro was probably the leanest contestant at the show. His structural discontinuities remain, of course, but this man is a good lesson about not giving up, a mentally tough guy with a well-defined purpose and a plan to achieve it. Albert Beckles, Johnny Fuller, and John Torelli rounded out the top five. The places were easily interchangeable here, with three totally different types of physiques, a judge's nightmare. My opinion is that the point spread does not reflect the true closeness of the struggle for third, fourth, and fifth. Torelli, a newcomer on the IFBB pro scene, is an Italian living in Australia. Although just 23, he has a highly finished physique with a very elegant presentation. He was my choice for third place. I had Beckles fourth and Fuller fifth. Look at the photos of all three men. Beckles is intensely muscular with a great back. Fuller is well balanced except for the lats and has good muscularity. His right pectoral tear is disfiguring, yet I don't consider it any more of a deficiency than Beckles' much higher calves. Fuller is relatively narrow compared to the shoulder and waist differential of Torelli, the best spread of the bunch. Both Fuller and Beckles are more mature in their physical development and display more roundness, but Torelli is structurally more proportionate. Torelli and Fuller possess long muscle bellies in contrast to the short, high muscles of Beckles. All these variables are what makes judging a totally subjective, time-consuming, agonizing ordeal. 6th through 12th place was a conglomeration of might-have-beens and could-have-beens. Bob Birdsong has exceptional arms and back, but forgets to pose his legs a lot of the time. Better presentation could get him into the top five. Dave Johns continues to improve, and he has the ability to once again break into the top five. As before, he needs to give up a little of his overall size to get his waist down. In his case, smaller would improve his proportions. He is already doing this, and the results show. Ali Mala has some of the same problems as Johns, too wide through the waist, despite possessing biceps and back second to none. He weighed around 205, which is 10 to 15 pounds more than I think his structure is capable of carrying well. Again, smaller would be better. Danny Padilla was in 75% shape and had in fact trained only 6 weeks since the 1982 Mr. Olympia. Padilla has the physical gifts to win the Mr. Olympia. In talking with him, it becomes apparent that he has too many divergent goals to realize the bodybuilding potential he possesses. Padilla freely admits that winning takes a single-mindedness that family and business obligations have not allowed him to exercise. Rod Kuntz has good balance, but he just wasn't hard enough to make an impact. He obviously mistimed his peak. He was sweating profusely during the prejudging, which indicated to me that his sodium-potassium balance was way off. Water retention, the bane of sharp muscularity. Steve Mihalik has never fulfilled the promise that he showed in winning the Mr. America over 10 years ago. Mihalik owns a very successful gym on Long Island, and I suspect that he has a situation with business and family obligations that is similar to Padilla's. He can be much better. He has been much better. Wayne Robbins is an amateur heavyweight champion of Canada. Great arms, but over his head this time. This is the night of the champions, and all the men have won major titles. They are all champions in their own right. The purpose of any analysis or criticism is to improve the sport. Most of these people are my friends. What is said is not personal. It is a reflection of my opinion of them as bodybuilders engaged in this competition, not as people. We must get away from the "you criticize my physique, you criticize me" syndrome. The body as a competitive tool is separate from the person. The Night of the Champions has been traditionally second only to the Mr. Olympia as the pro show of the year. While the competition was heated, especially in the first two places, the usual depth of quality was absent in this year's event. The promoters did everything possible to get a top lineup, but some of the pros have become less than professional with their disregard of commitments. Wayne DeMiglia, co-promoter along with Charles Blake, began the night show by explaining to the audience why Robbie Robinson, Bertil Fox, and Casey Viator were not present as advertised. DeMiglia said something must be done about the continuing problem of no-shows or pro bodybuilding will die. He suggested stiff penalties, such as a 1-year suspension from the Mr. Olympia. Only time will tell if the IFBB will back him up. Both Samir Bannout and Mohammed Makawe had promised to compete as well, but they did not. However, they both showed up and posed in exhibition. While they were only in 75% shape, at least they made an appearance. Tony Pearson and Scott Wilson were not advertised nor contracted for the competition. Both mentioned, however, their willingness to participate had not prior opposing commitments prevented them from doing so. Boyer Coe, as well as Mike and Ray Menser, have retired from pro competition and are now working for Arthur Jones, the Nautilus genius. That's the story, an interesting top 5, but a show to be remembered as much for who wasn't there as for who was. All right, and then we've got a couple other smaller articles here. First one is Greg Defaro, tired of coming up short. Greg Defaro's face reflected disappointment when Wayne DeMiglia announced Lee Haney as the winner of the 1983 Night of the Champions. Not that Greg was a bad sport about it. You could see he was upset, yet he did his best to control his feelings. It was just that this is, as far as he could see, was the second time in a row. I feel I should have won the Pro World Championship in Atlantic City, Greg said later. Everyone I talked to says the same thing. I also feel I was the best at the Night of the Champions. Greg was in great shape in Atlantic City, and he feels he was in better shape in New York. Moreover, he had worked very hard to bring up his round 3 score by developing a new posing routine. Samir Bannout worked with me for 2 days, 2 hours a day, helping me to work out a routine that fit the music and showed off my physique at its best. Samir is very astute in this area, and his help allowed me to improve my posing a great deal. In the past, Greg has been accused of having a physique that lacks certain aesthetic qualities, but this, he feels, is not what hurts him at present. I have been more consistent in my training this last year, more aware of my diet, and more careful of my use of anabolics. That's how I got into such great shape for these shows. Also, I've improved my posing routine, and I no longer have that as a weakness. So why are the judges still not picking me to win? From what I've been told, it may be simply that they find my stage manner intimidating, even though I don't mean it to be. Greg Defaro takes his bodybuilding seriously, and on stage in rounds 1 and 2, he usually expresses this with a fairly severe, serious facial expression. He believes that many of the judges have mistaken this seriousness for hostility and have tended unconsciously to score him lower than they would have otherwise. I have learned to be much more expressive in round 3, and now I must learn to show more of my personality, to be more relaxed and pleasant in rounds 1 and 2. I'm a Gemini, and there really are two sides of my personality, one that's conservative and the other more outgoing. I need to bring the outgoing side when I'm on stage. Meanwhile, Greg will not allow disappointment to get in the way of his career. He is training for the Mr. Olympia and making plans for 1984. Not winning has not destroyed my motivation, he says. If my motivation had anything to do with how I've been judged in the past, particularly this year, I'd be in a hell of a lot of trouble. And this article is When the Circus Came to Town, written by Bill Dobbins. The Night of the Champions, promoter Wayne DeMilia assured me just a few weeks before the show, is more than just a contest. It is a theatrical event, the kind of thing we need if we want bodybuilding to continue to grow in popularity and attract a greater number of fans. The Night of the Champions, said one fan standing outside Town Hall waiting for the doors to open, is a circus. Certainly, if you're going to have a circus, New York is a good place to stage it. There are lots of people in Los Angeles, lots of strange ones too, but they have the courtesy to come at you a few at a time. But even the weirdest of the weird manage to remain mellow. Not in New York. They come at you in bunches, legions. They holler a lot. They play bullfighters with the traffic. Have you ever met anyone who actually got a jaywalking ticket in New York? And in traffic, everyone, particularly the taxi cabs, plays bumper cars with one another. New York welcomed Muhammad Makawe with open arms. As he registered at the hotel, somebody walked off with one of his bags, the one containing his posing trunks, music, and an international air ticket. Hello there, Muhammad. Good to see you. Maybe he let down his guard because he spent too much time in LA when it had been raining there. In LA, crooks don't work in the rain. When the weather's bad, the population doesn't bother to lock its doors. Wayne DeMilia, of course, thrives in the New York environment. If the Night of the Champions is a circus, he is the ringmaster, and sometimes the lion tamer. For example, a serious question arose as to whether many of the pros who had agreed to enter the show would actually do so, and Wayne worked frantically almost up to the last minute to give the audience the best lineup of talent he could manage. If a lion tamer uses a chair and a whip, Wayne does equally well with his telephone. In this case, he had the leverage of threat, being able to bar missing bodybuilders from this year's Mr. Olympia in Munich. After tallying a phone bill to break the state of Wyoming, Wayne got his point across, and most of the pros showed up. A few were missing: Bertil Fox, Casey Viator, and Robbie Robinson. Muhammad and Samir Bannout came to the show, but as guest posers and not as contestants, a compromise they worked out with Wayne. The taxi ride from New York Sheraton downtown to the town hall is $1.60, plus tip, of course. When we arrived just before prejudging, a big crowd was waiting outside. Because of the lack of room backstage, John Balik was doing his studio-style photography across the street at Xenon, a popular disco, and as their favorites crossed the street from theater to studio and back, the fans were busy waylaying bodybuilders for autographs. There was a women's show as well, the Night of the Champions Amateur, Women's Invitational. The lineup was nothing like the men's show, although there were some interesting competitors. For example, we ran into Liv Sundby of Norway, whom we had just seen at the European Championships in Malmö, Sweden. The prejudging was like any other, long and demanding, lots of hard work for the judges. I was backstage doing color commentary for Chicago-based Sports Vision, which was taping the show for future telecast. Unlike the networks, when Sports Vision covers bodybuilding, it just rolls tape, recording the entire contest beginning to end. So you really get to see what happened, if you're lucky enough to be in the geographical area they service. If not, Wayne DeMilia is working on making the tapes available for a wider audience in the future, so don't give up hope. Meanwhile, being on the mic during the entire show makes for very long hours for announcers and commentators. After prejudging, we had a couple hours to go back to the hotel to change and eat. When it was time to return to town hall, right on cue, it rained. Getting a taxi in the rain in New York is not easy, though it can be done, but first you've got to get wet. Backstage before the show, it was obvious that the circus crew had been at work. Wires ran everywhere across the stage. There was a Harley chopper on which sat a young lady who looked as if she had just come from a successful S&M audition. Look out, New York. The wires were for Ken Passarello, the demon. Sure enough, when the theater darkened, out came a hooded figure preceding a coffin from which he emerged, or crawled, slithered, oozed. Ken's kiss-like demon, who prowled on stage amidst explosions, hence the wires, and lighting effects. Later in the show, a girl in black strode on stage brandishing a bullwhip. Jules Levine, if it's 10 o'clock, do you know where your daughter is? to be followed by Samir Bannout on the Harley with the leather-clad lady perched behind him. This wasn't what Samir had bargained for, but he carried it off with charm and style. Mohammed Makaway's posing exhibition was lit by flickering strobe lights, a guaranteed way to ensure not being shown on television, and according to more than one bystander, a method for hiding the fact that you're not in top shape. But then the critics themselves hadn't recently won 3 shows in a row, nor had anyone asked them to guest post. The outcome of the show was damn close. Lee Haney over Greg Defaro by 1 point. Lee, the judges seemed to think, was the more aesthetic physique, although Greg was probably more ripped. But Haney, it seems, just 1 year out of the amateurs, as yet lacks the ability to pose and present himself in the manner that Greg has acquired through greater experience. At least that's what Lee admitted during a post-contest television interview. "I know I'm definitely going to have to work on my presentation if I have a chance at winning the Mr. Olympia," he said. He also admitted something else. He had just been married just a week earlier. His wife Shirley joined him on camera, bringing with her the plaque proclaiming him winner of the 1983 Night of the Champions. And one more article. Sponsors, God bless them. A bodybuilder, says IFBB President Ben Weider, can train for years developing a championship physique, and the IFBB can make rules and establish guidelines regulating competition, but we still aren't going to have contests unless somebody out there is willing to pay for them. The greatest financial risk of a competition falls on the contest promoter. He hires the hall, puts out the advertising, and in the case of a pro show, guarantees the prize money. Unfortunately, as a promoter, it's all too easy to take a financial bath. So promoters constantly seek protection for their investments. And one way they do this is through sponsors. Sponsors are a promoter's safety net, says Wayne D'Amelia. If you can involve some good sponsors, you can spend some more money ensuring that your show will be first rate, and you can take a lot less risk doing it. So the obvious course for the IFBB, NPC, and AFWB, all of whom would like to see bigger and better contests that offer more prize money, is to work hard recruiting first-rate sponsors, and then convincing them that an association with the rapidly growing sport of bodybuilding is a business asset. For the record, the sponsors who helped put on the 1983 Night of the Champions were PK Equipment Company, owned by Tom Kinney, Bath Beach Health Spas, owned by John Barbero, National Physique Center, owned by Bob and Jeanette Fuchs, the Dan Laurie Barbell Company, owned by Dan Laurie. Thanks, folks. And if we go over the score sheet here, we can see in round 1, which is the symmetry round, that Haney took first place with a score of 8. So he got 3 or 4 first place votes, a second place vote, a third place vote, and a fourth place vote. So Roger Schwab gave him 4th. Roberts, I don't know who Roberts is, he gave him 3rd. Dominic Serto and Dandro gave him 1st. John Colacione gave him 2nd, and Boslin and Katz gave him 1st. Second place in that round, looks like it went to Greg Defaro, who got 2 first place votes, 3 second place votes, and 2 third place votes. He got a 10, and then Albert Beckles got a 15. So he was in 3rd place. Johnny Fuller got 17, so he was in 4th place. I'm looking for Torelli. Torelli got 28, so he wasn't even close. Round 2, the mandatory poses. Haney and Beckles both tied at 9. Defaro got 18. Wow, that's crazy. So Haney got 3 first place votes, and Haney got 3 first place votes, and Beckles got 3 first place votes. Oh, and Johnny Fuller got a first place vote. And Defaro got a 2nd, a 3rd, 2 thirds, 3 fourths, and a 5th. Wow. Okay, round 3, the posing round, Defaro got a 6. He got 5 first place votes and 2 second place votes, where Haney got no first place votes. He got 3 seconds, 3 thirds, and a 4th to score 13. And Beckles got 2 first place votes in the 3rd round. And he also got 2 4s, a second, and 2 3s. And then in the pose down, Defaro got 5 first place votes, 2 seconds, and a third. Haney got 3 first place votes. Yeah, so it seems like the judges preferred Defaro in the posing round for sure, and even in the pose down. So the final score was Defaro got 41, Haney got 40. So it was 1 point. You want me to read anything else, any different contests or certain bodybuilders, just let me know and I will put it on the next one. Take care, guys. Thanks.